Welcome to the Week 9 wrap-up here at the 16th season of Blood, Sweat, and Beers. First off, I want to thank AB for filling in last week, doing the recap for Week 8. Really appreciate that. It was nice to listen to someone else's hot take, lip-smacking notwithstanding, and hear about what you thought about the games. Oftentimes we get a lot of banter in the chat, but it was nice to sit and listen to someone recap each one of them rather than going through it myself. I appreciated hearing really what's in someone else's head rather than just listening to the voices in my own. So thank you. Really appreciate that. Now, over the last few weeks, a lot has been made about bench points, and I'm going to touch on it probably multiple times here in the next few minutes. Before we get into the recap and talking about specific bench points, how much of an indication of the strength of a team is their bench? Are a lot of bench points really just bad roster management? We've got our pop, and so we know where we're hitting, but is that an indication of maybe the strength of a team, that they have a lot of scoring potential? I'm curious what you think. Obviously, there are three positions that you can't ever double up. Can't have two quarterbacks, defenses, or kickers. And so if you've got an extra one of those on the bench, that could skew the scoring just a little bit, although anymore defenses are scoring like a regular offensive player, so that's probably a wash. But really, if you've got a strong bench and you're winning games, is that good? If you've got a strong bench and you're losing games, is there hope? If you're winning games and have a weak bench, should you be worried? Kind of an interesting thought on as we look at the bench scoring. But let's go ahead and look at all the scores specifically from this past week. Our first one, we start off with another skid from your commish. This was a rough one. I have to say that the percentage probability of win is maddening. I watched that thing swing like a seesaw back and forth. It was ridiculous. At one point, before really it all fell apart, I had a 95-7% chance to win. In fact, it almost looked like I was going to win going into the Sunday night game before my final two players played. And what happened? Well, Smith and Jigba decided to give a gift early this year. I guess we don't really... Anyway, 40 points, right? So how can you not feel good with a 30-point performance from your wide receiver on Thursday night? We know those are notorious for poor scoring. 30 points. I was feeling good. And in fact, up through almost the end of the day games on Sunday, I was feeling good. And then Smith and Jigba said, hold my beer. He decided to give 40 points, which was almost his entire October output. Seriously. So what a gift he gave Aaron. I guess Aaron does have some riz. Anyway, so that made some adjustments there in the West. We'll look at the standings later. If we look at the projected scores or potential scores and the pop, we see that Aaron did a pretty good job. He was in the 90%, but that low 80s from Kamish, that was rough. Obviously, you don't know when Joe Burrow is going to throw for 5 touchdowns. I mean, obviously he doesn't do it on the reg, but he does it apparently a couple times a season. So are we going to get the 13-point or 14-point Joe Burrow or the 40-point Joe Burrow? That's kind of a frustrating thing. But Joe Burrow would have won that game for Kamish, as would just moving on from Michael Pittman Jr. Put Jordan Addison in there. Boom, that gets the win too. So what could have been is obviously not. Our next score, Booger Pickers and Reed. A low-scoring kind of a snooze fest here, but AB really had an opportunity, bragged a lot last week, and just wasn't quite able to pull it off this week. If we look at the potential scores and the pop, we see that he certainly could have. In fact, either one of them could have really done a much better job, but AB almost gets a D, just barely breaks the 70% for his pop. Obviously left an enormous amount of points on his bench. In fact, his bench scored within a half a point of his starting lineup. Both broke 100, which was great, except for he divided it almost evenly between starters and bench. So is that just, obviously 70% is not great roster management, but is that a moral victory for AB because he had some decent points that he could have pulled from? I don't know. Regardless, he stays in first place, but dropped a game there. Our next game, Gloop and Pet Detectives, bottom of the basement there, fighting it out. Don't worry, guys. I'll probably be seeing you soon, along with, we'll talk about Jersey Birds in a minute. But this was a fun one. It actually went down to Monday night. Not a miracle situation by any means, but it was fun to watch the back and forth. That was a little bit of a seesaw. And as you look at the potentials and the pop, well, it was nice that Joe pulled that one off, so he gets to slide up one game on last place. But man, that was a lot of points left for Hoffman there. Would have been the highest potential of the week at 191. Just a couple of adjustments, and boy, that would have been a totally different story. He would have had 3 wins. Yay! Anyway, let's move on. Puzzles and Mr. Snuffy. This is interesting. Mr. Snuffy just continues to plug along. 138 for this week. It's not a bad score, but it only would have beaten 4 other teams. Thankfully for him, he was playing one of those 4 other teams. Any of the other 5, I suppose, not including himself, and he would have had the loss. But, sometimes good seasons come from random things like miraculous Hail Marys or something. I don't know. Sometimes the ball just bounces the right way. So Puzzles has been struggling a little bit off and on, drops another one, puts himself 3 games back in his division. So not great for him, but what are you going to do? 5 games left. All right, last game. Take a look at Poncho and Jersey Birds. Poncho is on an absolute tear. It's a shame the first half of his season was such a flame out because now here he is, 4-5, but we know all you got to do is make the playoffs, and since 60% of us do, and you got 2 guys fighting it out in the basement, it's not unreasonable to think that Poncho just marches himself straight to maybe the championship game, if not his 3rd championship. We'll have to see how that goes, but high actual score on the week. If we take a look at the potential scores and the pop, he did it by excellent roster management. Just one minor thing. How do you know CJ Stroud's going to throw or put up less than 4 points, right? But not that he had much other option, but Tank Dell was his only other choice, and that would have bumped him up to 174. Not a huge difference. So he managed that roster really well. And if you look at Jersey Birds, yeah, there was nothing he could have done. 135 is a total potential. 100% pop would have meant only losing by 36. So that was not great. Now, I apologize. I don't know if I had anything to do with this, Ian, but, after calling you out, it was really technically, we watched it after week 3, even though it was a week 2 overreaction, that we were going to just hand you the trophy. You won one more game, and you have dropped a ridiculous 5 in a row. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but going to this length to prove me wrong seems a little excessive, maybe a little counterproductive for you. I'm not saying that's what you're doing. I'm just, as we look at it, whatever. Anyway, let's try not to make it 6 because that gets embarrassing. Just ask Joe. if we look at our standings for this up through week 9, it has been pretty consistent. A little bit of variation, some separation through the middle, at least in the West. Reed, it was despite dropping the game, still hangs on to first place. Aaron, by way of beating Kamish, slides into sole second, and then we've got third, fourth, and fifth. No ties going on in the West. In the East, however, you've got the top 2. 1 game separates first and second, and everybody else jumbled up at 4 and 5. So everybody's got a shot as long as they stop losing and start scoring some points. But we'll have to see. It looks solid over there. Everybody with a better than coin flip toss chance to make the playoffs. So the West seems to be the weaker division this year. Oof. As we look at our season stats here, again, no great surprise. Our number 1 and 2 teams sitting up there. We see the points that they've scored, and at this point, it's interesting that Poncho has now, for a second time, at least through 9 games, second time in 3 years, 3 seasons, he's got the most points scored. Now, I don't know that continues. We've got 5 more weeks, so there's a lot left to play. I don't know that continues, but again, he has the most points scored in the league and a losing record. That's rough. It's just, it this depends on what's happening, what's going on, because frankly, he's only got the 7th most points against. It's not like everybody scores points against him, but enough at the right times to take push him back under 500. So we'll have to see. Shout out to Hoffman, first player to have 1,300 or more points against him. I'm sure he's excited about having that particular designation. But as we look at the bench scoring, as we're talking about scoring points for and against, right? How much does the bench really factor into the strength or the perceived strength of a team? If you look at our 2 number 1 teams, if you look at Mr. Snuffy and you look at the read option, as you see them here on the season stats, they are about 100 points off, right? Mr. Snuffy has 100 more points over the course of 9 weeks. That's not a ton per game. But it's interesting if you look at the pop, which we'll show here. Here we see that Mr. Snuffy leads the league in pop. So he is managing his team, which led me to wonder, because read option is so far down, right? Number 8 for roster management, and yet he's in first place. So I did a little bit of digging. I looked at some of the numbers. And as it turns out, and again, if you've got a second quarterback or something, that will skew the numbers, because you can never start the second quarterback. But not all of us even have a second quarterback. But if you look at the points that AB is leaving on the bench every game, I mean, really powered by his last 200+ point benches, he's looking at about 78 points a game on the bench, while Mr. Snuffy is looking at about 48 points per game. Actually, I think it's closer to 72 for Reed. Anyway, that's a pretty big swing. So I went back and I looked, and if you add up total points in the roster plus points on the bench, that 100-point difference flips. And AB ends up with 100 more points on the season than Mr. Snuffy. So again, I ask, should that be a moral victory for the read option? Should he be excited that he's got that many points to pull from and could actually start managing better and scoring more and have a more definitive, or I guess a more confident feel going into the playoffs? Or does it not really matter because they're on the bench and we slide bench players around all over the place? Is it just whatever happens on the bench stays on the bench? I don't know. It's kind of interesting to see. 5 weeks left. It's not crunch time, but it's getting close. Enjoy week 10.